Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to The Exchange. I'm Tom Lenfestey. Glad to have you back. And today, I will tell you, I'm super excited to have one of my best friends join us today, Camille Stell. Camille and I go way back in the world of succession planning for lawyers. So really excited to have a conversation with Camille on a lot of things that we've seen change. And so welcome, Camille. And I'll ask you, Camille, if you want to just tell us a little bit about yourself, and then you and I can kind of roll into where it all started and where we're going from there.
That sounds great. I'm Camille Stell. I'm the Vice President of Risk and Practice Management for Lawyers Mutual in North Carolina. We're a bar-related malpractice insurance company, and I help lawyers. I serve as a law practice advisor and a consultant for lawyers. I spend a lot of time talking to them about how to run their law offices, but my specialty that has really developed, Tom, as a result of the work we did together is succession planning, retirement, compensation planning, just how to help lawyers figure out what to do with this valuable law practice that they built, that they might not know what the next steps are after that.
That's right. Been at it a while, right? Learn lots, help many, hopefully along the way. Camille, I just kind of wanted to go back because, getting you on the podcast is super exciting, but really going back to, where I would say it was the start of the law practice exchange concept. But one of my first, meetings and kind of pitching that idea was with you and some of the team members at Lawyers Mutual. And I just go back to that. I think that was probably 2013, 2014, right? So we're sitting here in 2026, so a while ago. But going back to that, can you think, because I remember certain parts of that meeting being very like, is this a good idea? Really, truly, like, is this a good idea to, push to help buy and sell law firms, to help for succession planning? Can you think back to where we were in 2013 or 2014 and what the state of maybe knowledge or the state of the market was back then?
Yeah, I think about that time, a lot whenever something comes up and you and I are going to be in the same room at the same time, right? As you were telling me that day, your practice and how you worked with healthcare providers, and specifically you talked a little bit about dentists. And your example was, the dental student model and, how they could get money from a bank and could buy a dental practice. In 2012, 2013, we were still coming out of that really hard, economic crash and recession of, 2008, 2009. Law students, I was talking to law students all the time, brand new lawyers, they were struggling. And I have to say, initially, one of the things we chased for a little bit was trying to connect law students, recent graduates, with retiring lawyers. I would say at that time that didn't work out exactly as we thought it might, but I think that's an idea that continues to have legs. And what we're able to do with that conversation today is just remind lawyers that early in their career, when they're thinking about growth, that a retiring lawyer practice is something to look at. But I remember well the conversation. I remember being amazed at how it worked for dentists and being incredulous that no one had thought about doing it for lawyers yet, and knowing that immediately it was going to work.
I think we had, 50 or so attendees. And I think back to those early days of everything there was focused on, I've tried to hire an associate. Right? Like
Yes.
I've tried, and a lot of these, solos to small partnership firms, but I've tried to hire and that hasn't worked. And I think that's the biggest thing as we kind of shifted some of the conversation around, well, look, it's not just hiring for succession. It's really finding your buyer. And it's really thinking of what you've built as not just you're passing something off from that, but it's like you have to groom this person. You have to choose them. You have to know how this is going to come. There's a lot more pieces in play. But I think back to that is there was immediately, right, this need for knowledge. And I think all the time, like, lawyers so much like to be educated movers, meaning education first, then move. And that was a perfect example of those that would attend. And we had multiple attendees over the years to the same program who really just would come for that knowledge. And I think about today where there's just so much more talked about of like selling a firm, buying a firm, and acceptance, and we've come a long way. All right, I mean, I think we've come a long way in that, but those core concepts, I think we heard. What do you think back then were the biggest pain points for lawyers?
One of the things that I heard a lot, and it would be, well, this concept may work for someone else. Someone else's firm may be ripe for selling, but not mine. It won't work for me. But hey, I'm here to listen and learn, and I'll get some CLE credit, but at the end of the day, I'm sure it's not going to work for me. And I think even today, while people call and they say, hey, I know about this concept, but the underlying fear is still, but will it work for me? So that probably hasn't changed a ton because of the nature of sole practices, right? So much of it is the individual lawyer, is the firm. And that's really then what helps create the conversation that your firm can't be just you. And that doesn't mean you can't be a solo, but you might need to be a solo owner and have some process and procedure, maybe, hire some associates, you might have to change up your business model a little.
Do you think those conversations have hit with certain attorneys where they've really started to shift the focus from being it's just me to it's me plus, right? Or it's me and a business that I own and am part of. Do you think that needle has moved for lawyers?
I can say 100% the needle's moved. I mean, these are conversations I have all the time. I would say I'm not alone in working for a bar-related insurance company. We have an aging population of insureds, right? The people that I deal with, talk with, work with every day, a lot of them are senior lawyers. And I will say even amongst that older age group, they know that things have to be different in order to get a different outcome. But I would say one of the single biggest shifts is from 13 years ago when I was talking to all the 70 plus year olds, and let's say the late 70-year-olds. My conversations now, Tom, are with people, 55, 58, 60s. And so that is a tremendously impactful way that your business has moved the conversation, is that people now approach this idea of succession planning. Perhaps, they are exploring it from the buying side. They're still in growth mode, but they're also saying, at this age and stage, what I know for sure is I'm not going to do this for 15 more years. So help me create a plan that will have me retiring at an earlier age where I've got more enjoyment left in life.
Those are the most exciting, right? The ones that are ahead of the game and, everything else that can look and start the process and, plan, with control to break away. One of the things, Camille, that we continue to see, and I'm sure, as you do things and everything else, is succession planning for lawyers. Like we've already talked about it from when we started, but I still think today succession planning or getting started in that, right, just seems really hard. Why is that? Why is that for lawyers, even though the tide maybe has started to shift a little bit and you're having more of those conversations? But why is it tough for some lawyers to really go and say, I need to do this? Not just talk about it, but really to take those steps. Do you have a perception of why, as lawyers, it's just kind of challenging for us?
One reason I think is they fear it means immediately. I'm going to succession plan means I'm going to work myself out of a job tomorrow. And that is a fallacy that we can help alleviate right away. The plan can be for as long as you want the plan to be. But that's a big concern, is it's going to happen faster than I'm ready for it to. I think the other is that lawyer mindset of, I need to know the answer to every question before I go down a path. And because this is a topic that is still not in front of them in the normal ways, right? They don't learn about it in law school. They don't find out about it at just their regular CLE on, litigation skills, or, the latest, greatest in real estate. They have to seek it out a little bit. And I think they don't feel like they're experts in it. And many lawyers want to be experts in everything that they kind of embrace as a step forward for them, something they want to do. They want to feel really comfortable. And I think a final thing I would say is, lawyers like to know the outcome before they get to it. And there's not one definite outcome, right? Succession can look like a lot of things. I know you say a lot, don't just plan your replacement, look for a whole bench. Because one person, something can fall apart easier, but they want to know the absolute outcome, and that's just not knowable yet. And I have a lot of empathy for lawyers who are thinking through all this, because, they have a lot riding on it. They're, responsible for multiple people inside the law firm. They're responsible for, financially supporting their family, providing good advice and counsel to their clients. There are a lot of pulls on their time. So, for me to say, go to a few CLE courses, read a book, talk to some experts, well, that's very easy for me to say, when they're managing all the things in running a law firm. But, that empathy doesn't stop at just, I'm empathetic for you. Now let me help you figure out how to do this. And there are so many resources that weren't there 13 years ago, right? One is the Law Practice Exchange has videos, testimonials, people that you can get on the phone with, practice management advisors that they can talk, and there are just a lot of resources that are available for folks now. So, it's not easy to pull yourself away from your practice and from serving your clients, but it's in your best interest to do so.
Because again, you're on daily conversations with lawyers about succession planning, right? Retirement planning, everything else. What do you think legacy means to them? Like the word legacy to lawyers, mostly law firm owners, right? Or practice owners. What is that legacy to them?
For some lawyers, and it'll be very different for the generations coming through. But Tom, I still know so many of those lawyers who are working to their 50-year mark in practice. I'm sure North Carolina is not unusual in that, there's a big 50-year luncheon and an award ceremony. And, there's all the things that the state bar and other organizations do. Some lawyers think about that as their legacy. They've hit a particular milestone, and that's legacy to them. And so they don't want to start thinking about shutting down too early, down a practice before they've reached milestones that are important to them. For others, the legacy is in their community. They look at the people that they've served, and they can't imagine not being there for them. That lawyer whose office is beside the courthouse, I still know some of those folks. And they depend on and feel that they're giving something back to that community by having that open door where people can literally stop in and say, hey, is John here? And John will walk up to the front desk and have a conversation with them, often with no money being exchanged, but peace of mind when that person left. And that's legacy for a lot of lawyers. They look at that community and they say, I made a difference here. And then for others, I think the legacy is their family. I provided for my family. And many of those folks I talk to, they consider the people who work in the office part of that family. So they provided for their children and their spouse, but they provided for the 3 support staff people who've also been working for 30 years for them. So I think legacy looks like different things, but it is really impactful. And many of us should be so fortunate as to leave that kind of legacy behind.
Camille, this is a little bit taking us in a different direction, but maybe similar. You brought up, the concept where we had talked about, trying to get new grads, right? Like the dental model, again, can place new dental grads with, retiring attorneys. They buy their practice and they're off and running. But one of the things that keeps coming up, and we are part of that, trying to help is, call it these rural markets, right? These very traditional, like smaller town communities that aren't just in North Carolina, they're across the country. And so they're really having a bit of a succession crisis in, some of these communities not being served by the next generation of lawyer, right? But have you thought about how that plays in? Is there a solution that succession can provide, right, for attorneys, or other strategies that you've really looked at for helping these, other markets, non-metro markets, find that next generation of operator, lawyer, service to that community?
I think about this all the time, and I am so excited by some of the lawyers that I have seen trying to conquer this. Brian King in Western North Carolina is a perfect example of that, right? And he's obviously a fan of yours. He buys retiring lawyer practices. He starts new offices in small rural communities across, Western North Carolina and, on into South Carolina. And he does it by bridging the generation gap in a way that some folks just haven't figured out how to do yet. But, he's in front of those law students when they're still students because he's hiring them as interns. He's running, boot camps for summer associates. He's investing in time with the law schools to help them understand who he is and what his practice looks like so they can help recruit and send the right people to him. There are models that are going to work in small rural communities. But the flip side of that is for those communities that don't have that, there is a technology solution that a bright, young, enterprising lawyer who wants to expand their scope and reach outside of a metro area can do. And it might not mean opening a law firm beside the courthouse, but it might mean showing up in the community 1 day a week, 3 days a month. So we just have to be open for multiple solutions, and we have to look at all the possibilities. And when I say we, I mean you and me, but I mean our communities at large, the bar at large. Yeah, for sure, I would say that. I think one thing that I'd like to see more of is I would like to see these conversations become broader conversations. For me, it's a little bit like, paperless law firms in the 90s. There were 5 lawyers who were talking about it. By the time the 2000s rolled around and, people were doing more of it, those 5 lawyers were like, oh my gosh, what took y'all so long? I think, you and I get to sit in a place where we see, hear, and experience a lot of things that the bar at large doesn't get exposed to. And if I had a message for the regulators, and I thought the regulators were listening, what I would say to them is, you're not doing your members any favors. And if you're an individual lawyer listening to this, get on the internet and start reading about some of this stuff, because it's going to happen. And you can either be looking at it 10 years from now thinking, how am I ever going to catch up? Or you can start making your own way today.
I mean, it's amazing how much stuff has changed, right? Like we have different things that we've already talked about on the podcast about private equity movement into this space, just the technology influx with AI. Otherwise, I mean, it's a lot of change to your point. Regulatory needs to kind of, not just shut walls, but like open for ideas and solutions. And then if your lawyers push for those. Camille, as we kind of try to, wrap up, don't keep you too long, but one of the things I want to give you a large amount of credit for is you were one of the first people, probably the first person to teach me that lawyers actually did have emotions. Like we have emotions as lawyers. We like to bury them deep, right, from that aspect. But, I think when you and I used to do talks together, I'd come in as the attorney CPA and do like, let's talk numbers and transaction, right? Like this is a business transaction. Let's get it valued. Let's get it structured. Let's get it sold. And I think, where we talk about legacy, but we also talk about the emotions. And a big part of what we have figured out through, your, enlightening me early and then clients showing me this again and again is that the emotions do play a part, right? In this, not just from the legacy mindset, but also as it goes through the process. And one of the best ways that we have found, and I'd be interested to get your insights, is this transition plan. We always talk like, you have a law firm, you can get the financials right, but the true success from both sides, like an owner of a firm who's selling or building out a succession plan, or from the buy side who is the successor, both will feel that it works so much better. Get the numbers right, absolutely. But both will feel it works so much better if they get that transition plan right. Meaning, so many different things. But in your mind, what is that transition plan and how do you get it right? If you're a law firm owner, looking to, develop a sale or succession plan, work with that buyer or successor, like how do you get a transition plan so that it is a true win-win?
Who's going to tell somebody what to do? There's the old boss, the new boss. Who's going to tell the paralegal? And having been in the paralegal role, I can tell you it matters a lot to me who's telling me what to do, right? So you got a transition management. You've got a transition leadership, you've got a transition client relationships, and you've got a transition external relationships. And I think sometimes both parties go into it and they hear that and they say, well, okay, we'll just do it. But that doesn't happen. And so I think you and I have found success with checklists and spreadsheets and meeting dates and, buyer and seller sit down on the first Wednesday of every week or first Wednesday of every month, and they outline all the referral sources that they're going to have coffee and lunch and dinner with over the course of the next month. And they're going to put them on their calendars, and then they're actually going to go to those together. And the seller is going to say, hey, I want you to meet my new partner. We're in this together, buyer and seller, you're in this together. And so it's putting meetings on a calendar, it's having a checklist, it's having buyer and seller in a room with staff talking about expectations and who's going to do what and how and when. It's creating new process and procedure in a place where maybe none existed. But if seller doesn't help get buy-in from the rest of the office, buyer's wonderful process and procedure is going to end up in the trash can. So checklist, spreadsheets, meetings, appointments on calendars, that's where the implementation happens. That's where, and it doesn't sound like magic, but that's the magic of a transition happening right there.
Well, I just go back to, again, when I look at, especially from an emotional side of a seller, they are going through it. They're giving up control, right? They're transferring this control. And so to be heard makes it feel better, right? Of like going through of like, this is how I've done things. This is how you can do things. So, there is an emotional shift too, like getting some of that emotional baggage because you've at least been heard and you can say, this is how we built and now you've got it. Okay. You've got the baton. Great. Passing, like some of that worry diminishes. And then from the buyer side, they feel like the seller's vested, right? Like, they're really helping right through this process. And so my big takeaway from what you said is you got to be intentional. You have to make it that material part of any deal, right? Whether you're an associate for a long term, buying out the partner, whether you're an outside, firm, buying another firm or anything in between, I think it's really making that transition intentional. And again, I love your point about that monthly meeting. I usually would tell people like, go to lunch weekly, even virtual lunch, right? Like make sure it's on the calendar, it happens, because that's where these things come up. And it's like, hey, so and so was telling me they really don't know who to ask. Like, who should they ask for this? Or, hey, our Microsoft Office seems to be not working in this new download you guys did. Just weird things that can create stress if they're not addressed. But when you can kind of communicate and go through it, I think that's the big part.
Yeah.
All right. Last thing as we kind of wrap up, I'm going to just ask you, what do you think really has changed and is significantly improved, maybe as a material point or anything else, from where we were almost 15 years ago? And starting to talk, like, as you have a lawyer that calls you up, today, later after this podcast or tomorrow, like, what do you feel like, man, like we have come a long way?
Yeah. So I would say I really like seeing earlier age, earlier in the process that folks are thinking about what to do and how to do it. So I love seeing that. I think that we're moving the needle a little bit on it's different to hire an associate than it is to hire your future law partner or potential successor. We had that conversation on day one of the first program that we attended, when we kept hearing about all the failures with hiring associates who didn't stay, and that's one of the first lines that you or I came up with. Who remembers at this point? But you're not hiring an associate, you're hiring your successor, and that process looks different. So I'm glad to see, I think we're making headway there. I think valuation is a very different conversation today. I think lawyers years ago, they didn't particularly understand the concept of valuation. Everybody wanted a price. I know you remember that from our first program, right? Excuse me, how much is my law firm worth?
Yeah, this is my numbers. Really. Tell me today.
Give me a number. How much is my law firm worth? And understanding what actually can go into a valuation. They might not understand any of how that works, but they, I believe, are moving to a place where they know that valuation of the firm is more than just them and the value that they bring to the law firm. So I think that's impactful.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's even from our standpoint. I mean, back then we talk about valuation from comparable other businesses. Today we get to talk about it from, hundreds of completed transactions, right? And, real life market data, of this is what, personal injury or trust and estates or this type of family law firm is transacting for in market. We've come a long way, right? From that and everything else. Camille, as we wrap up, and I greatly appreciate your time and insight, and it's always great to catch up with you, and hopefully we'll get a chance to do another talk or a webinar together soon, or we'll have you back on the podcast. But if you were to tell lawyers, like the lawyers that do call, or just as a generality, one next step, like they're interested in this topic, right? Dependent on timeline, they may be very interested, like, hey, I'm ready to retire in 2 months, or they may be, 5-10 years away. What's the next step? Like, what would you tell everybody? Take this first step to really start down a sale, a succession, plan.
You need an expert to talk to. I think that that's key. And I think, obviously, I consider you the expert, the Law Practice Exchange. So call Tom. Check out the Law Practice Exchange website. Listen to an episode of the podcast. I think starting to get that information, I think that's an important next step. I also think that lawyers need to start thinking about their timeline. And I think that's hard for all of us to do, right? Like, when am I going to hang up the thing I've spent my whole life doing? But it's important. And so really start thinking about that timeline and, what do you, how long do you want to work and what do you want that to look like? And then finally, I think it is so much harder to walk away from something than to run to something new. And if you don't have a plan for what you're going to do after retirement, none of this is going to sound appealing to you. So think of what you want to do with your life after law, because there's a big life out there for you to continue to live. So start thinking about it.
I think that last piece, Camille, one, I appreciate the, the plug and the, for us and everything else. I'll send you your check for that.
Thanks.
But the overall aspect is the last piece of moving towards something, right? Getting excited. And I know you and I have been on mutual transactions. You've been helping clients where we've been helping clients. And it's always more exciting when they are, hey, I built this firm, but I'm moving on because I've created a software and I'm moving on to a tech company. Or, they're in retirement, but they're like, hey, we're doing this really exciting, really long excursion cruise. This is something I've put off for years and I'm really excited to do it because they get to move towards that, right? I've never taken longer than a week's vacation. And my goal is once I retire, I do this and hopefully do more, right? Like they kind of go out and do that. And I think, yes, retiring towards or exiting towards something makes it more fun, more emotionally, kind of relieving. We have a mutual client that was here in North Carolina, and I remember going through, and all along he was telling me how, I don't know if I like this. I really don't know if I like this, Tom. We're going through, and of course we're chipping away, getting everything that they want on the sell side and the succession plan. But at the end of the day, he's like, I have controlled this. This has been my fiefdom for so long that I'll admit it, right? I'm fearful of not having control. I don't think I'm going to like it. And 2 or 3 days, and you and I probably talked about this, Camille, but after, the deal's closed, everything else, the dust is settled, I'm talking to him and he says, you know what? I was kind of dumb because you know what comes with a loss of control? Less responsibility and more opportunity, right? And it's just as you give up that control actually has a burden over you, right? Your time, your financials, your stress, your everything else. And once you get out, he's like, I don't have to worry about making payroll next month, right? I don't have to. And, I don't have to worry about being the first one in the office anymore, right? And I don't have to worry. And he said, this is part of that opportunity and that freedom. And I think so many, to your point, forget that that is waiting for you, right? And you can actually make that an intentional part of your plan. Don't just be surprised by it, but plan for it and go through that. And I think that hopefully is a great motivator to just take that first step, take the next one, keep going, and go from there. Camille, I greatly appreciate the time. We will definitely chat again and have you back on the podcast to kind of go through that. So thanks so much for joining us.
I would just say, make sure that you're, if you're listening to this and we haven't alleviated your fears yet, name your top 3 fears about starting succession planning and start chipping away at alleviating those fears, whether it's by getting a new piece of information, having an initial conversation, but identify 3 fears that are stopping you from moving forward and spend the next few months getting over those fears. And there's a whole new world waiting for you.
Absolutely. Yeah, I always like when you go through it, say them out loud. How realistic do they sound when you really say, because usually they're worst case scenario, right? Camille and I just want to thank you again for just, years of friendship and of course, support and everything else as we build this. But the biggest thing we have today, you and myself and Law Practice Exchange, other advisors that help on succession out there, is we have proven success to show you that, yes, you have those fears. Others do too. And if you can work through those, to your point, you can be successful. And so I think that's a great thing that we didn't have maybe when, even we were back in 2013 is right. We could talk, but we couldn't show you the substantial results. And today we can. And that's an exciting, win overall as we try to build this and really help lawyers do more. Bill, thanks so much for the time. Greatly appreciate it. And we'll definitely have you on again and see you next time.
It was lots of fun. Thanks.